Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Kasia Staszewska, and I'm the manager of AWID's Resourcing Feminist Movements Initiative. And I would like to invite you for the 30 minutes conversations with on gender impact investing with Sanam Amin and Diana Yahaya, who are inspiring feminist economic justice activists, organizers, and mobilizers, and also the authors of the report that AWID is launching today, Gender Impact Investing and the Rise of False Solutions. I am based in Warsaw, in Poland. Sanam is connecting from Melbourne in Australia, and Diana is in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. As you know, it's not always easy to connect across geographies and across time zones. So huge appreciation again to you, Sanam and Diana, for making it today, for all your work, and really for being here to share your critical analysis as well as some key evidence. What is it that gender impact investing stands for, and what are some of its major economic and political implications for feminist movements? Before we start, I also just want to acknowledge that the report we're putting out to the world today is the result of the collective sense-making process, and really appreciate the generous contribution of wisdom, time, and analysis that many feminist activists and scholars have contributed to this process to really collectively unpack what is gender impact investing and call out some of the risks it brings to the world and to our work, whether we're talking resourcing feminist movements, economic and climate justice. And for this, we thank you. But now, without further ado, let's talk gender impact investing. And I'm going to start with you, Sanam, and really ask you to take us through the basics. So what does gender impact investing actually stands for? Who is investing and in what? And why feminists should actually care about this?
Thank you so much, Kasia. This is a great opening question for us to go through, as you said, the who, what, and why. So first of all, when we talk about gender impact investing or gender lens investing, it's a small subcategory of impact investing and this world of sustainable finance. And if you look at the report, you'll see that we've developed a very complex Venn diagram to show you how these terms kind of knit into each other, almost like a nesting doll. I won't delve too much into the investment industry, but just keep in mind that this is just a small part of it. And what the idea has been is that to use the massive amount of wealth that is locked into the investment industry and put it towards something that will do good. And I think what the report will show you is that there are some things that we need to be wary about when we go into this. So the first thing that I think made us wary is the lack of a clear definition or any standard. There's no common standard for what exactly gender impact or gender lens investing would be. What would those factors be? What kind of gender analysis will play into the investing world? There's not even a commitment to do no harm in this industry. So all in all, what we found in researching this report is that there's really no accountability around GII, not for the investors, the influencing actors who are promoting GII as the solution to mobilize funding for gender inequality and social change. And now to jump to who is involved. So there's a lot of people who are experimenting, promoting, and practicing GII, but what is really worrying that we found in this report is that a massive amount of public money is going into this new phenomenon of gender impact investing. And this is kind of against this narrative that, oh, we're going, like I said, the private sector money from the investment industry is going to go in to help do good things in the world. That's not what's actually happening. It's public money that's going into this experimental style of investment, and it's subsidizing private sector investments that are being done by multinational corporations. A lot of the time, we saw a lot of parallels between impact investing and the microfinance narrative that we've seen a couple of decades before. But one thing to keep in mind is that no matter what term comes along, at the end of the day, it's still an investment that looks for financial returns. It's still looking for minimizing risk, and therefore it's not likely to go towards something that's unprofitable. And to also sort of supplement some of your questions, the numbers that we've seen in regards to this sector is very difficult to understand, because all of the figures that are available from the different reports we looked at are based on investor self-reporting without any sort of cross-standard or checking. We also felt that there might be some double counting as well. However, based on what we've seen and the interest level and the commitments from not just the sector, but also different actors, including intergovernmental actors and governments themselves through their development finance agencies who are doing these public, putting in the public money, we see that the amount of money that's going into gender impact investment is growing annually, but it is so small. Like I said, it's a subcategory of the style of impact investment, but it is growing, and it is still very significant amount of money when you compare it to the amount of money that goes into development, into philanthropy, and the fact that there's only just a small amount of that going towards feminist movements and women's rights organizations. And that's why that becomes something to think about, because even if it's a very small slice of a very small subcategory of investment, it's still a massive amount of money for the feminist movements that are chronically underfunded.
Yes, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Sanam. And I think really the fact that there's a common standard definition was one of the reasons why we as AWID decided to pick up this work, to really try to make sense of what is it that this rising trend is really about and unpack some of the jargon. If I can go now to you, Diana, to really continue on this line of thought, because the report explicitly calls out gender impact investing as false solutions. Can you share a little bit more and maybe bring some of the arguments and evidence from the report? Why is it the case?
I also want to just recall the first time I actually heard about gender impact investment, and it was about 6-7 years ago, I think, and it was at a UNDP meeting, and I still remember it very, very clearly because it was the first time I was hearing about it. And UNDP was obviously promoting it as one of the solutions. And then I remember having conversations with folks at that meeting and afterwards around what does this mean? And, and just generally how a lot of people didn't really know what it means. And then you fast forward 7 years down the road, right? Where we're having this conversation now with us at AWID, and there's still effectively no clarity around what does it mean when you say you're doing gender impact investment and we're saying it's doing good, right? And that really is where the whole use of the systemic and structural change language that a lot of the actors, a lot of the investors, a lot of the governments, even I guess UNDP back then and then UN Women today, was using around gender impact investment, but without being able to tell anyone what does it actually mean. And so you have all these actors co-opting this language and saying that gender impact investment will bring systemic and structural change, but not really telling us how it's going to be. And really throughout this research, the only sort of systemic and structural change is just really about unlocking women and girls' potential. So either putting them in the market if they're not in there yet, putting them in the labor force participation if they're not participating yet, putting them in the boardroom if they're not in the boardroom yet, and maybe paying them slightly better wages than what they were getting prior to gender impact investment, right? And that is really being touted as a systemic and structural solutions and transformation that GII is going to bring. When we know as feminist movement, when we talk about systemic and structural change, it's really about dismantling the whole system of patriarchy, the whole system of capitalism, and the whole system that doesn't give women any kind of agency to decide how our political, social, cultural, and economic system is being designed. And really, GII doesn't give you that, right? In fact, at the very, very basic, when some of the interviews we spoke to wouldn't even go as far as saying that GII would at least not commit harm. And when you look at the way the money shifts and who the money comes from, as Sana was mentioning earlier, it's mostly from the public sector, it's going to the private sector. You realize it's also just about a way for a lot of big investment firms and multinational corporations to make money using public money. So this entire idea in the beginning about leveraging private sector money doesn't even come into the picture. And then you put that in that entire context that you were both talking as well around, that asymmetrical power relationship, the colonization and new colonialism of the global north, of big, large multinational corporations, and how much power they have within our financial, political, and economic system. I think, throughout the report, we tried to really seek out, give us some evidence around how gender impact investment has transformed someone's life or anyone's life, right? And most of the people we interviewed were not able to actually show us. And so I think that co-optation, when you're not even able to show that those changes are actually happening, is really, really harmful. And I think it's really, really dangerous for the feminist movement, because as Sanam was saying, it's just going to end up being used to actually take away resources and financing from women and girls who actually need them the most.
Thanks so much, Diana. And I just also want to go a little bit deeper in terms of what does it mean to do gender impact investing, or GII, as we call it in short, and also acknowledge that that as much as there's a very wide area of definition what gender impact investing means, there's also a big diversity of actors who are engaging with gender impact investing. Some of them from women's rights, feminist groups, and social justice groups, and who are actually setting themselves up for higher standards. If I can ask you, how does it sit with the picture you have just shared, and could these higher standards of doing gender impact investing could be part of the solution?
So I think one of the things that we really tried to sort of touch on a little bit more in the report as well is really the nuances in all of the different approaches that people who do gender impact investment while promoting gender impact investment actually have. If we could categorize them sort of broadly, we have a set of people who just perhaps genuinely and sincerely believe of the capacity and the ability of capitalism and financing to do actual good, right? And transform our society, and remedy gender inequality and so forth. That's the first group, right? And then there's the second group, which I think I would describe as people who perhaps acknowledges how harmful and dangerous capitalism and finance is, but also, are realists and who admit that we live in a system where capitalism and finance is powerful and dictates every aspect in our lives. And so we need to figure out a way to deal with them while we live within that system and figure out how we dismantle the system. And then I think there's the third group of people, which I think as the authors of the report, we can say are people who just believe that the only way we can go forward, the only way we can really do this is to really just dismantle the existing system that we live in, right? Which in this case is really capitalism, as well as, the power of finance, and multinational corporations and investment firm. And obviously a range of people who sits in between those three different categories. And I think that's just one of the things that I think we've always often acknowledged within the feminist movement, that we do operate with multiple different strategies, just because we don't only tackle the systemic and structural solutions. And so I think it's really kind of important to acknowledge the nuances and the diversity that people's perspective converges on this when it comes to GII. And because of that, as you mentioned, Kasia, that there are some groups of people, perhaps in the second and the third group, who are trying to do GII in a very genuine, not just non-harmful way, but in a way that actually resources and finances the feminist organizations and the feminist movements, and operating outside that traditionally accepted GII model of for profit, right? But I think one of the things that we've also found in the report, and we make it clear in the report, is that unfortunately, as much as we would like that to be more accurately representative of the GII infrastructure and the GII, entire landscape, unfortunately, these are small scale examples. They are one or two amazing philanthropic donor, perhaps one or two, governments is really trying to embark on this, in a very ethical and feminist way. But for the most part, what we've seen in GII, it's not that it is putting the interests of feminist movement or women or grassroots communities at forefront. It's really about multinational corporations and investment firms extracting profits and, getting more public resources within their finances. And because of that being the overall landscape of GII, I don't think we're going to see this model or GII itself being a way that we can, in the end, really truly remedy the system and the structures that are driving inequality and injustice. And I think that's something that we as the feminist movement, as we deal with this, have to kind of reckon and figure out how we sit within all these different categories and how we engage with all of these different actors, with all this different mindset as well.
Thanks so much, Diana. And if I can now go back to you, Sanam, and to speak a little bit more about what has been recently going on in some of our feminist and social economic justice organizing spaces, and look back into the August 2022, when you, together with Diana and as well as 700 other civil society organizations, scholars, including some women's funds and social justice funders in the mix, successfully campaigned against UN Women commitment to promote gender impact investing through its partnerships with BlackRock. If you can tell us a little bit more about this campaign and why is it that it has brought so many activists and allies across sectors in this end?
Thank you so much, Cassia. So I think one thing that we have to acknowledge is that we didn't expect this to happen as we were putting the finishing touches on our report. And I think on some level, there was sort of extra radar towards these issues because of, like I said, the research and work that Diana and myself were doing, but also, as you mentioned, we had done a sort of sense-making workshop as part of the research and work in putting together this report. And so we were more alert to the fact that UN Women was taking up gender impact investment and gender bonds and all of this as a sort of venue for them to be an actor and a connector across governments and private sector. And what essentially happened is that we saw this announcement in May of 2022 that there was an MOU being signed between BlackRock and UN Women for promoting gender impact investment. And what subsequently happened was a very sort of decentralized campaign where we brought together all of these groups that you've mentioned. And it was quite phenomenal because it hit all of these intersection agendas of feminist, climate, economic, and resourcing justice issues, all of these different movements sort of coming together. And that is really because of what BlackRock is and as well as what it has done. So I do want to recommend that folks specifically distinguish, because a lot of these are very similar sounding, right? So BlackRock, BridgeRock, Blackstone, these are all investment firms. Yeah. So if we just stay at the BlackRock, Blackwater, Blackstone range, BlackRock and Blackstone are investment firms. Blackwater is a private mercenary group. But all of these harmful in their own ways and actually supporting each other in different ways. BlackRock is, as I described earlier, part of this investment banking world. And this investment firm estimated a value over $1 trillion. And like I said, that's just one of so many firms. There are, I think, more than 2,000 such firms just from the United Kingdom, similar or even more figures like that in the United States. BlackRock, Vanguard, and others are these top investment firms from the United States. And compared to that, the impact investment world is just a sort of a fraction of what BlackRock is valued at. And BlackRock invests in a lot of things and sits on a lot of money. And the money that they're making includes areas such as the military and military industry. And this is ultimately why we're saying that systemic change is not this, because you cannot make money off of military industries and off of conflict and off of fossil fuels, which also is a separate sort of thread that we need to follow, that you can't just make a lot of money off of fossil fuels and then throw a little bit towards climate finance and think that that will fix all of it. So this investment firm is one that is doing active harm. And to say that we're going to fix that by doing an agreement and then going to work on a little bit of impact investing, a few million here and there, it's not going to fix the bigger problems that they are responsible for. And we also, in this campaign, sort of brought together groups who had already seen the issues of BlackRock separate from this MOU already. Several Indigenous leaders in the previous year had put together a letter directed at BlackRock explaining that they had been causing great harm to lands, waters, and really our planet. And this is also at the heart of what we are saying about impact investing and gender impact investing specifically, that it's not contributing to the bigger agendas of climate justice, of redistributive justice, nor is it looking towards building towards reparations and so on. We did come across a few actors who were trying to do things a different way and change things around, but this is not what this sector does. And BlackRock is a representative of all of the problems that we see in this sector and the harms that it causes for the planet, for Indigenous people, for women. And this is why I think the campaign release was a sort of lightning spark, and it brought together all of these groups, because we were just stunned that, like I said, the lead agency for gender equality goes to sign an agreement with such a harmful firm, and again, divorcing itself from what social justice movements have been saying. And here now you come to us with a firm that is not only implicated, like I said, with all of these harmful industries, but is also implicated in sovereign debt. Sri Lanka right now is in financial crisis, is defaulting on its loans, and these loans are held by BlackRock and other firms. These are private loans that were sort of issued to them, and this is why we, in one example, in one agreement, we saw all of the dichotomies and all of the problems that we are bringing up about a capitalist system that accumulates and sits on wealth, that takes advantage, that keeps global South countries vulnerable and struggling, and decides to always profit off of it. I think what really struck me while doing these interviews was one of our interviewees, Jennifer Olmsted, brought up this point that entrepreneurs are supposed to be risk takers, but actually what we're seeing in the investment industry is that all these groups, private sector, are letting people take the risk, are letting people take the damage, deal with the debt, deal with all of the austerity measures, and everything that goes wrong goes to them, while these firms keep holding the profits.
Thanks so much, Sanam. And now back to you, Diana. The report is quite clear that as the gender impact investing trend continues to grow, feminist movements will really have to reckon with its increased influence in the multilateral, intergovernmental, and funder spaces. And we're already pushing back against it, as in the case of BlackRock. But looking forward, what do you think are some of the key entry points for feminist activists and movements to start asking critical questions about gender impact investing and hold those who promote this agenda accountable?
Well, I think it is, as you mentioned, Kasia, quite clear that this trend has arrived and it's probably going to stay around for a while. And then we also know that this comes from the fact that a lot of multilateral agencies and governments, especially in the global South, rightfully don't have resources and financing for delivering human rights. So there is a genuine resource issue. and financing issue. But that's also why, you know, like when those of us who did a lot of work on the sustainable development goals used to joke in the early days, now it's hardly a joke anymore, around how, you know, we used to like sing around how MOI is MIA, which is means of implementation is missing in action, because there's no way to implement all these wonderful, even if, you know, somewhat acceptable sustainable development goals, because there's no money in it at all, right? And that's really what's been shifting the turn to the private sector, because they do have money, right? We know that the actual solution is to get money from the private sector, but not through impact investment or gender impact investment. It's through all of the different, you know, demands that we've had around tax justice, around trade justice, around debt cancellation, which has a much more clear, accountable, and strong, you know, very clear line of like drawing out finances from private sector, from those most wealthiest, you know, from those where all of the wealth actually sit, and actually putting that into not just resourcing feminist movement, but also into financing, you know, in a lot of countries, you know, all of the development and the human rights that's actually needed. At the same time, I think that conflation of GII with financing feminist movement or resourcing women's human rights was also, I think, a very, very critical point for us to be wary about. Because obviously we know a lot of governments, a lot of multilateral agencies, a lot of philanthropic foundations and donors as well, you know, would often say, oh, we're funding women's human rights or we're funding feminist movement, but in fact are actually funding gender impact investment, right? So I think it's really important and critical for us to be sort of vigilant around that, because it is taking away resources from the feminist movement and feminist organization who needs it the most.
Thanks so much, Diana, and thanks so much, Sanam. I think we're at time, so I'm going to stop us here and really appreciate all the arguments, your critical analysis and contributions that you have shared with us today, while also recognizing there's still so much more that needs and should be said about gender impact investing. But for this, I'm going to encourage everyone to dig into the report, Gender Impact Investing and the Rise of False Solutions, that is available in English, Spanish and French from AWID website. Of course, there is no way, and I'm not even going to try, to summarize all the key points that have surfaced during our conversation today, as well as from the collective sense-making process and the contributions that a number of feminist activists and scholars have made to this report over the last 2 years, and also recognize that there is still more that we need to learn and unpack about gender impact investing. But what we know for sure, and what we know now, is that it's not going to bring systemic change. And it is really our hope that the report we're putting out to the world and sharing with you is going to help activists, movements, and allies in the funding institutions, as well as in other spaces, to unpack some of the jargon behind gender impact investing and to seed some of the critical questions about this agenda, as it has already happened with us in AWID. We recognize that it's only the conversation starter and are really looking forward to more of critical engagement around gender impact investing with you. Thank you.